Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Bryce is Right. I am Bryce, and one of my goals is to promote positive atheism and secular humanism. And I am rather excited today to be interviewing our guest. He is none other than John W. Loftus. Maybe if I could speak properly. That's how excited I am. John Loftus, he is a former Christian minister with master's degrees in Divinity and Theology, turned atheist author. He's written numerous books, including The Christian Delusion, not to be confused with The God Delusion, which was written by some other author. He's also written Christianity is Not Great, and most recently, The Case Against Miracles. Loftus also owns the website debunkingchristianity.com, the link in the description below. And without further ado, John, welcome to the Bryce is Right. How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I always appreciate when somebody recognizes my work and wants to talk to me, and so I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, I accidentally, well, not accidentally, but one of my producers kind of forced me to let the cat out of the bag. He wanted to know what I had upcoming, and I mentioned your name, and we had several people in the chats that recognized you and were excited to see you on the program. So,
well, nice.
You got some fans out there.
Woohoo!
So, first of all, just in case, we'll no doubt have a number of viewers who may not be as familiar with you or your work. So I like to start with an introduction. But first, let me say thank you for taking some time out of your day to do this. I know we had some trouble syncing up with schedules and all that. So we had to do a pre-record this time, which is, fine. I like to do that to accommodate special guests. But I appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Well, thanks. I didn't know that, I was changing your schedule any, but thank you so much for accommodating. Appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries. And okay, so tell us about yourself. What I do here, I tend to interview a lot of theists. I interview a lot of atheists. But very often I find that I'm interviewing atheists who've deconverted from a previous religion. Often it's Christianity. I've never had the opportunity to speak to someone who deconverted from the ministry. And so this is very interesting to me. So you're not only a former theist, but you're a former member of the clergy in some way. So what was that process like? How did you come to be where you are now?
Well, first of all, there are a lot of us. There are, I mean, a lot in the sense of, a certain percentage that would stun people, that people who had been in the ministry or studied to be theologians or teach in Bible colleges have decided after, seeing what it's like on the insides of a church or, studying Christianity at the highest levels, that they would, turn away and say, well, this is not for me. This is not reasonable. I cannot believe. I don't know about the numbers exactly, but there's several friends I have. David Madison, he writes with me on my blog, Debunking Christianity, and there's a lot of actually ex-Christians and ex-ministers that frequent the place and other forums and stuff like that and write books. Bart Ehrman is one. Hector Avalos, who passed away recently, he's another. Robert and Bryce. I mean, I could go on. So
yeah,
I'm not alone. Now, what happened to me was 30 years ago. I was having a crisis, and I began to, think about Christianity in depth for probably the very first time, where I looked at the basis for it as if I was never raised to believe it. Just like as an outsider, as a non-believer, and when I did that, because I think it's a good, reasonable way to evaluate your indoctrinated faith, that I came to think that it's not true. It's false. It's in some cases it's ridiculous. Balaam's ass talked. The snake actually talked. Things like that. The sun stood still. Some guy put his hand in his breast and it became leprous. He put it back in and he came back clean. Things like that had no evidence for them at all, except for a story, a tale, that the ancient world had lots of those kinds of tales. So what happened is I decided to look at my faith differently. I decided that maybe it's not true. Now that's unusual. People don't actually do that very often. They just throughout their whole lives they just assume it is true till the dead, till they're dead. It's like at no point in time do they ask themselves the serious question of, is it true? And I asked that question and I came to believe it was not my faith.
Was it something specific in your life around the time when that happened that led you to do that? Was it just a moment of clarity where you decided, let me exercise some skepticism here about my faith, or was it something that triggered that? Or how do you think that happened, and why did it happen when it did?
Well, 30 years ago, I had several different kinds of experiences that required me to evaluate my faith. I mean, I'd had a bad church experience or two, and I thought to myself, well, wait a minute, now doesn't the Bible say that the Holy Spirit resides in Christians and makes them better than others? And I found that not to be the case, not in the churches that I was a part of, And so I thought, well, that's really a failed promise. Then the Holy Spirit was supposed to, help people be better than the others. I mean, after all, you got God and the Holy Spirit inside your, lives, and you don't act any better than others. And so that was an important thing. Another thing is I got bombarded by a lot of information from a cousin of mine who taught biochemistry at a naval base. He sent me a big box of books. That's not even how big they are. I mean, I had probably about a foot and a half by a foot and a half with magazine articles and stuff like that. And I started reading through them, and I got bombarded by information at that time that caused me to wonder about my faith, especially, creation, okay, and especially the stories of the Bible. And another thing is just the church didn't treat me well. I got fired, and I didn't have a happy relationship with my wife, and whenever that's the case, people tend to wander, and I wandered, and the backlash was pretty bad. But again, that was 30 years ago, and it was a good thing in a way because it helped me to know the truth, and I haven't regretted the decision to walk away from my faith, and actually, the more evidence, I learn more evidence every day that is against what I was raised to believe.
Well, that's a good question. How were you raised, and what kind of a preacher were you? What type of church? Was it
I was a good preacher. I was a good preacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got him fired out. I even, I remember a few times even purposely trying to say to myself, can I make them cry and laugh out on the floor in the same sermon?
Now, were you always believing while you were doing these sermons, or did your doubts come in when you were still preaching?
The very last sermon I preached, I was in the throes of doubt, and I preached about one of the stories of Moses, who never existed and never led any people out of Egypt. But I preached a story where God called Moses. And he says, "Who me?" And surely you want someone else. And in that sermon, it was about me. I was about ready to leave. I was about ready. I was asking God the same kinds of questions. But that was the very last sermon I preached, and after that, I didn't preach anymore. And it wasn't anything I wanted to do, and I wasn't really asked to do it anyway. But
did you come? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But while I was preaching, I was a believer in the pulpit up until the time I left.
Right. Okay. And would you have considered yourself more on the fundamentalist, like evangelical side, or were you part of more liberal, maybe old earth creationists? What were some of the doctrines that you believed? Which way was it more like young earth creationism, fire and brimstone, or was it like happy, friendly, hippie Jesus? Oh, we love science, we love the gays. Or was it something in between? I find that there's a spectrum.
Yeah, there is, and I became Christian. I converted from my indoctrination into Pentecostalism. I converted from Catholicism to Pentecostalism in about 1973. And I went to Great Lakes Christian College, and I became a Church of Christ person because that's what they believed. And then they're conservative, very conservative, fundamentalist. And I went through further schooling at Lincoln Christian Seminary. It's called Lincoln Christian University now, and then up into Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, which is a pretty important and influential evangelicals taught. Included William Lane Craig. I studied under him. People might know of him.
Yes.
He's a good guy, but he's wrong. I mean, dead wrong.
And I would say he's been using a lot of the same arguments for many years, and they were failed arguments to begin with, and in my opinion, debunked many times, but he still seems beholden to them. But I'm curious because you mentioned, theology and divinity, and you have a master's degree in theology and divinity. I'm not sure my audience would understand the difference between the two. I know I don't. So what is the difference between a master's in theology and a master's in divinity?
Oh, I have a Master of Arts, and that's in philosophy. I have a Master of Divinity, which is in theology, and that's a professional church-related type of a degree that seminaries introduced because they need more money.
Okay.
And it makes everybody who has one, feel more important, I suppose, because they can put the M period DIV period after their name. But it's an important degree, for ministry-related sorts of things. And then I got a THM degree, which is a Master of Theology, and that was earned under William Lane Craig at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. I took half of my hours under him at that school, and then I went on to Marquette University and studied a PhD program in theology and ethics. I've been introduced to most everything that needs to be taught, and I walked away, and I don't regret it. And I have arguments that show that this theology that I was taught is bunk. That's why I called my blog "Debunking Christianity." Now they don't like it. They don't like one of their own who is a turncoat, I guess, in a way.
Have you had conversations with Craig since your deconversion?
Very briefly. It's cordial and nice. I think he's a nice man, even though he wants to send people to hell. And he doesn't think it's too bad for babies to get their heads chopped off. He's not actually wielding that sword. So, personally, he's a warm guy. I consider my friend, not just my mentor. And yet he doesn't want to debate me, and he doesn't want to acknowledge my presence. In a way, because I don't know why. Maybe some of it is he'd have to recognize that here's one of his own who rejects his arguments and knows them well, and it would make people pay attention. And so he doesn't want people to pay attention. He doesn't want people to know of me. I mean, after all, I've got 12 books. So basically, it's an encyclopedia of arguments, and just to mention my name is alert his followers that, hey, those books are out there. Maybe we ought to pick up one or two or three. And after they read one or two or three, they might read 4 or 5 or 6. And then,
the catalog is quite extensive. I was surprised because, I was looking you up, and depending on the sources, you've written 5 books or you've written 10 books, and apparently you've written 12 books. So do we have more in the future, or have you said all there is to be said?
That's it. I have 2 more books, and then I've said all there needs to be said. If people go to my blog, debunkingchristianity.com, the marquee will have the books that have been published so far, and not on that marquee are my my 2 the 2 that are coming out within months. One is God in Horrendous Suffering, where I talk about the problem of evil, and I've invited a lot of different scholars and voices in the atheist community to help me deal with that issue. And then the the other one is called Jesus, the Varieties of Jesus Mythicism, which I've co-edited with Robert M. Price, basically the veritable Jesus mythicist scholar of our generation, Richard Carrier and him anyway.
Mhm.
And so then I'm done because I've said all I wanted to say, and I'm going to go and enjoy life with my wife.
Well, I've had the pleasure of speaking. I've had the pleasure of speaking to Dr. Price and now you. So that leaves one more in that trifecta. And Wes will have to introduce me to Mr. Carrier. Hopefully we can get his perspective as well. But
he's brilliant. He's super brilliant. Yep.
Yeah. And, looking over some of your books, a couple of them just by title caught my eye. We have some of them up here. I noticed the Christian delusion, and I couldn't help but wonder if that was a play on the God delusion or if that's just purely coincidental.
No, it's definitely designed
Okay.
that way. It's, Dawkins talks about the God delusion. Well, I wanted to fine tune it just a little bit, talk about the Christian delusion. And that's an anthology of voices that do a really good job of showing why Christianity in specific is a delusionary faith. And so as the Christianity is not great, as so as you had that up there, that's titled after God is not great. Christopher Hitchens' title. And then there's another one that's called The End of Christianity, which is titled after Sam Harris's book, The End of Faith. So yeah, the first three books were titled after the four horsemen. I didn't get to Daniel Dennett's, Breaking the Spell. It would have been called Breaking the Christian Spell. But I've got those books have arguments inside them that are tailored to Christianity, based on the New Atheist general God type books.
And it makes sense as Christianity is the largest theistic based religion. So, why not tailor it? I'm sure in a few years someone will come up with the Muslim delusion. But I think
there's some books out there already that are already being done. The Atheist Republic has produced a few books having to do with Allah and Islam. So look that up. I mean, really good books. And Ibach Warren is another author. If you want to look at the Muslim faith, then that. And I mean, I'm not an expert in that other faith. So it'd be like me writing a book on the Mormon faith, I suppose. I'm just not. And there are out there. They're out there, and others do a good job.
Would it be fair to characterize you as a Christian anti-apologist or counter-apologetics?
You can call me a philosopher if you want, or a counter-apologist. That's one or the other. I counter the apologists. In fact, I even tell them how to do their job right. I'll show you. Have you seen this? Can you see it?
Oh,
can you read that?
We will in a second as soon as we enlarge that.
Oh, you have to. I know how that goes. You have to switch things. But
yeah,
how to defend the Christian faith? Advice from an atheist. I'm serious.
Wow, that's pretty funny.
No, they don't like that book. You'll see them on Amazon. They a couple of reviews are pretty bad, but you wouldn't expect some of them to like it. But it's a pretty good book. It tells them exactly what to do if they want to be an apologist. But in so doing, if they want to be a good apologist, they would end up not being an apologist at all. If they want to be a good apologist and to do it right, and to base it on objective evidence and good reasoning, good sound reasoning, then they wouldn't do it at all. That's the premise. That's what I do.
Learn too much. Probably
it's sort of a tongue in cheek, and so they don't like it. It's on a false premise. No, I'm actually giving you good advice. The problem is, it's your faith. It's what you're trying to defend. That's the problem, not the advice.
Have you talked to Christians who've read the book and criticized it?
Oh yeah, I do. In that book, I write against some of them. You see their names. David Marshall being one. You'll find him almost everywhere. He thinks he's somebody, a good apologist. And in fact, that's why my books are so good. If people think they're good, it's because I'm actually dealing with real objections from real Christian scholars, not people who just all of a sudden picked up a book and started reading and say, well, I don't believe anymore. So they started putting together things. But I'm talking about bona fide scholars who have, learned in the seminaries and universities about their faith. And so what my goal is to take these arguments, the arguments that I, know from my own seminary and university days, and what I learned from others who are, now apologists, and I dissect them. I bring them down to the average reader so that they can understand that at the very top levels of Christianity, their arguments are bunk. I mean, and so they're not going to like it when I do that. I mean, these apologists are not going to like that at all. But it all comes down to the lack of objective evidence, and that the fact that their faith makes no sense at all. I mean, they don't like me saying that, you see, but it's true. It's absolutely true, and I defend it in, I like to say, 12 books. So,
yeah. What do you think of Frank Turek?
Well, he's a smart guy. I've seen him in debates. He's got pretty good wit about him. He can rattle off some things that all before you know it, you say, what just happened? Serious. But he's dead wrong. I mean, he's no different than, his, I assume it's his mentor, Norm Geisler. He's no different than William Lane Craig. He's no different than J.P. Moreland. He's no different than Josh McDowell. They still keep spitting off, or Lee Strobel, they keep spitting off the same kinds of things. And they're really not listening. Or Tim Keller, I could keep naming them. They're not listening. These apologists don't seem to listen. It's like they read a pamphlet, or they read a flyer, or they read the worst arguments. They'll pick the worst arguments from atheists, and they'll say, well, see, if I can show that their worst arguments are bad, then therefore John Loftus's arguments are bad, and so they won't want to have to deal with me in some cases, I guess. So. I just don't see anything in Turk's. I've got his book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist with Norman Geisler, and I've read through it. I've seen some sorts of things, but it's not anything new. It's just simply not new. That book is basically a regurgitation of Norm Geisler's book called Christian Apologetics, published, I think it was 1977, which I read through at the time and believed and thought. But there's not much new. I mean, how can you go that many decades and all you would have is more mysteries? That's all they've got. Well, we've got more mysteries now to solve, and the mysteries that couldn't be solved in 1977 have been solved, but now we've got mysteries that haven't been solved in 2000 and whatever when that book was published, and so we still have mysteries. So long as we have mysteries, we have God.
I've actually made that point a number of times in some informal debates that I've had. I've always viewed, God and the supernatural in general as just a placeholder for things that we don't understand.
Exactly.
We see that going back throughout history in various cultures, and maybe the difference between the monotheistic God of Abraham versus some of the other gods that you see in polytheism is that in the Abrahamic God, now you have a God that can be the answer to all questions, whereas back in the Greek pantheon, you had Zeus explained lightning, but then once we found out what lightning is, it's a naturalistic explanation. We don't need Zeus anymore, so we don't have to believe in Zeus. But now you have a God that can really be any question you ever have. If you don't know the answer, God did it. And since we'll always have questions, that seems to explain why we still have this belief going on and on and on. But that's just my theory, unscientific.
That's arguing at the highest levels. I mean, because you don't get any higher than that. I mean, you haven't dealt with so-and-so sophisticated apologists. You haven't, dealt with so-and-so else's arguments. But that's the bottom line. And what they're doing is mystery substitution. So if something's a mystery, I don't know, how you account for, say, the brain or speech or consciousness. Mm-hmm. And so you can't explain that something, so therefore God. But then God is a mystery. So you're just substituting one mystery for the other. I mean, so God doesn't explain anything if he's omniscient and omnibenevolent and omnipowerful, and just exists with three in one. personalities that
which can't
that
be
never
explained.
that can't be explained, and you know, so they're basically substituting a mystery that doesn't do anything. Where's the objective evidence for this God? Where's the objective evidence for any of God's actions in the Bible? And I make the argument that there is absolutely no objective evidence for any of the miracles in the Bible. None. You have testimonial evidence. That's different than objective evidence, because testimonial evidence, it can come from a secondhand hearsay, or could come from liars. Objective evidence, like, in a criminal case, there's a gun, it has fingerprints on it and has, DNA left on it. That's called objective evidence. There's none for any of the Bible's miracles. And so if I couldn't believe someone who claimed to have sank 18 holes in a row, then I couldn't believe in a miracle that says Jesus rose from the dead either, or that a fish was caught, when Jesus said, just draw a line, or that an axe head floated, or a burning bush, just mysteriously appeared. You can't believe human testimony if someone says, I sank 30 basketballs in a row from the half court. Then why would you believe someone who says, you know what, my wife turned into a pillar of salt, without any objective evidence? But that's what the Bible says, and that's what the Bible says you should believe, and that's why believers believe it, because it's a virtue. It's a virtue to have that kind of faith, because, well, that makes me a special person. I've been given the gift of faith. Well, no, because Allah gives that gift of faith too, and different religions and their different miracle claims, they believe on faith. Faith is a vice, not a virtue at all. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I am someone who, none of those guys gave me any faith, because I don't have any. My culture and my family indoctrinated me to believe that faith is a virtue. And so I think I had it when I was a child, just like I had faith in Santa Claus when I was a child, because if adults are telling me it's true and I trust them, then why wouldn't I believe it? It wasn't until I got to the age of reason and started questioning things, and then getting bad answers, that faith started whittling away. And I find that, the Bible, in my experience reading it, seems to suggest that faith is a virtue. Those who are weak in faith have fallen away, and blessed are those who believe without seeing, and faith is the evidence of things unseen, and all of these things. But the one thing the Bible doesn't seem to tell people is how to get faith. It tells you should use it. It tells you should have it, but it doesn't tell you what to do if you don't have any. How do you get faith in the first place?
Well, most of it's indoctrination. The other parts have to do with the tent revivals and snake handlers, like dances, mm-hmm. and moving songs. It's like, well, I don't understand. I know that for me, I was indoctrinated to it. I mean, now there are some people who say, well, I study this very intensely, and I came to the conclusion, blah blah blah. But if you get into some kind of discussion with that person, usually you'll find that they have some kind of background in Christianity in the first place. Because if you were raised in a Muslim culture, and then you were a nominal Muslim, or you didn't care one way or the other, then all of a sudden you study. What are you going to study? You're going to study the Muslim faith. You're not going to turn around and study the Hindu faith, maybe, or maybe the African tribal faiths, or the Christian faith, or the Jewish faith. You're going to study the one that you are acquainted with, and then you come away thinking, well, I've realized that I know my faith is correct. But all they studied, usually Christians anyway, and Muslims as well, is to read the literature that apologists for that faith write. Well, how'd you study your faith? Well, I read J.P. Moreland, C.S. Lewis, Lee Strobel. Oh, you did you? What else did you read? Well, I read William Lane Craig. What's that guy's name? J.W. Wallace. Josh McDonald. Is that what you did to study your faith? Yeah.
Maybe that's where I went wrong, because when I had a crisis of faith, I studied the Bible, and I kept looking in the Bible to try to find how to resolve my crisis of faith, how I'm losing faith. So what do I do to get it back? And I kept trying to find inspiration in scripture. And that passage is not there. There's nothing that I've come across in scripture that tells you how to get faith back when you begin to doubt. The only thing I kept reading was, don't doubt, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to thine own understanding, suspend critical thinking, don't apply skepticism to the thing that you're required to believe here. And it didn't tell me, you mentioned, well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I get your point, and it's valid. I remember, you know your scripture. I mean, I used to be able to outquote my professor at Great Lakes Christian College. His name was Mr. Hargraves, and he basically knew the Bible. I mean, backwards and forwards. He knew. You ask him something, he could give you book, chapter, verse, and everything. But in my days there, people said I could outquote Mr. Hargraves. I don't know if that's true. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, that man was a veritable. So that man was a veritable machine when it came to spitting out those quotes. But you obviously know more. You remember more about the Bible now than I do, because I've forgotten those passages, many of them. But what I do is I know that also in the Bible, God says, "Come, let us reason together." Right, Isaiah, you know that, right? And he also says, "Love the God with all your heart, soul, and mind." Right. So, even the doubting Thomas story is meant to do something, but I'm not sure what, because in the end it says, "But blessed are those who believe, even though they have not seen."
Jesus contradicts himself in the story.
He does.
He defeats his own point in that story.
Exactly. Go ahead. You want to tell that story?
Yeah. I mean, so Jesus is resurrected. Thomas is the one disciple that doesn't believe it. He says he won't believe until, he thinks Jesus is a ghost, and says he won't believe until he can see the holes in his hands. Jesus comes up to us. Thomas, stop doubting. Look at my hands, and then Thomas sees the holes in his hands, and then he believes. And then, so Jesus gives him the evidence that he needs to believe. And then he defeats his point right after that by saying, you believe because you've seen, but blessed are those who believe without seeing. Well, if that's true, then why did you give Thomas the evidence that he needed to believe? The way to make the message that you want is to have to write it so that Thomas believes without seeing, and then you will have proven your point.
Exactly. I mean, exactly. It's the whole point is to believe even though you have not been given the evidence. And the story itself of doubting the Thomas is not considered evidence to me. It's not considered evidence to the readers. It's a story of a man who purportedly was received the evidence, but that in itself is not evidence. That's a story. It's a story. It's a story. And what's the lesson? To believe without evidence. So but I found those things like let us reason together and love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And so I thought, and he also says, test me in this, like in the Malachi passage. It was about tithes, but in chapter 3, test me with your tithes and see if I don't give you more than you give, or something like that. So so I thought I would test God. I thought Gideon tested God. Moses was able to test God with his leper's hand, and Abraham, I think. So I thought I test. Well, why can't I test? Don't tempt God. James says, "Don't tempt God." Right. So
Jesus, I think, says when he's on the he's being tried by Satan in the wilderness. Satan says, "Hey, if you're really the Son of God, jump off the cliff. He'll send the angels." Jesus says, yes, but you've heard it said in the scriptures, do not test the Lord thy God. So it's saying test God, but don't test God at the same time.
It kind of annoys me that your scriptures better than I do, because I used to know the scriptures like Mr. Hargrave.
In fairness, I'm only a recent deconvertee, relatively. I mean, I've been an atheist for 3 or 4 years now, but I mean, I will say in my last few years as a Christian theist, that's when I was really into the Bible. My first 30 years, I wasn't. But I read, I had to, because I was into Christian apology, online Christian apology, but I was being challenged by all these atheists and people of other religions. And I realized I didn't know the Bible as well as I should to be able to make the apologetics argument. So I started reading it and then realizing this doesn't make any sense. This is contradicting that. How can I resolve this? How can I interpret this in such a way to make it be true? And then I realized what I was doing. That's not how you're supposed to find truth. You're not supposed to make what you believe, make what you want to believe true by finding the interpretation that works. That's not how rationalism works. So, and then once I realized that, it all, I lost.
Yeah, you don't actually annoy me. I said that in jest. I think that most atheists, know the Bible better than their Christian counterparts, and you're evidence of that. The more you know about the Bible and the contradictions and the discrepancies and everything that is related to that, the more you know about the Bible, the less you're going to believe it. So. And that's what happened to me. I studied at the highest levels, and I studied philosophy and ethics and theology and the Bible, and I just given my crises, if God wanted me to keep in the fold, then He shouldn't have converged the kind of things that converged on me in the same year that happened to me. But the thing is, the delusion is so strong. And my indoctrination was so strong that it took those kind of things to jar me to do what I should have been doing all along from the get-go, and that is to investigate from a non-believer's perspective whether or not it's true. And I didn't do that until I started wondering, well, where is God given to all this? I mean, what's going on in my life? And how do you answer these arguments? I mean, I studied at Marquette University, which is a liberal university. I studied in a liberal program under Daniel McGuire, and you can look him up. He's still out there, and he's not an atheist, but he makes atheist arguments, And then when I got into the ministry and these things fell on me, I started reconsidering what I was taught at Marquette University and read more and more and more and more. And I think the more you know, the less you believe. And so it wasn't long before I couldn't believe it all.
Yeah, you mentioned a little while ago, one of the arguments that, causes people to settle into theism is this idea of consciousness, the problem of consciousness, and where does the mind come from? And it's interesting to me because my background is psychology. I have a degree in psychology. And once I started learning about that, and neurology, this is very difficult to reconcile with some of the ideas given in the Bible about the soul and life after death, and all of these things just don't seem to be consistent with really anything that we know about the brain, anything that we know about, the sense of self, identity. These things don't correspond to the biblical notions of soul and personhood or any of that. And so that's very difficult. Just learning the science of the brain and behavior for me was another nail in the coffin. By then I'd pretty much already lost it, but it was like realizing, how did I ever believe in such a thing as a soul? Like that's not a thing. You're not even the same person now as you were when you were a 10-year-old. How are you expected to be the same person and then responsible for some sins that you did in another life, in some life after death where you have no brain, and there's, it's just, none of it really makes any sense.
Yeah, almost any of the intellectual disciplines in a university will show you that there's something about the Christian faith or its doctrines that doesn't have any evidence for it. And neurology is leading the pack probably right now.
I read a statistic recently that among people in the psychology fields, neurology, psychiatry, when you look at the sciences, scientists in general, the natural scientists tend to be less religious than the general electorate in this country. But even among the scientists, those involved in the study of brain and behavior are much more likely to be atheists than even the other scientists, So it really is the idea of the soul is probably, I think I heard Matt Delonte say, it's the single most dead issue in all of in all of theology when you know the science. But
I think he's right.
So what about some of the other apologetics arguments you hear? You hear, for general theism, we have cosmological arguments and arguments from design and fine tuning and all of that. I think I know what the counter apologetics are. Do you find yourself spending more time on that sort of stuff, or is it more time on things related specifically to Christianity, like prophecy and personal experiences and miracles and things like that?
I only wrote one, maybe two chapters on philosophical arguments against God. It's in my my magnum opus, Why I Became an Atheist. It's about 550 pages of small print, and inside is one chapter, and then I think another chapter somewhere. Where is that? But most of my arguments, well, the rest of them, are having to do with the Bible, having to do with theology, having to do with miracles and the problem of evil. That's four of them. There's another one I'm missing because I could rattle them off usually. But the five main arguments that I deal with. They're not necessarily philosophy or religion type arguments, even though I have a master's in the philosophy of religion under William Lane Craig, because that's not where in my opinion, that's not where the beast can be found. It can be found in these other arguments. David Hume made that type of argument way before me, that even if there is a God, how you know what kind of God exists, maybe he or how he created the universe, and maybe he could be an evil God. How do you know if a God exists, what kind of God exists? And so that's where the debate rages, because if there is a nebulous God out there, the God of spirits that never does anything in the world, you just feel him, a deist God or a mystic God, so what? Unless this God tells me what I need to do in verifiable ways or gives me evidence that he exists, then I'm not going to do anything different. That's the whole point. I'm not going to do anything different, believe anything different throughout my whole life, unless there's revelation and there's verifiable, means of ascertaining that revelation. My last two books, one on miracles and the one on horrendous suffering, attacks two of the main reasons why, even if there is some kind of God, there's no objective evidence that he does miracles. That's this book here. You have to flip that around, I think, don't you?
Well, we don't have to do that. Was yeah. Let's see. I think we can.
You can read that. Thank you.
Yeah. I came prepared.
Yeah. No, that's actually out of 12 books. Of course, I always think that my latest book is my best one. Really, truly, every one has been my best one all along the ways. It's like I don't put out a poorer product. I keep, in my mind anyway, keep putting out better products. And this is so I would have to say this is my best book to date, and the book that is coming out on horrendous suffering beats that one. But these are two important books. That one talks about the evidence for a miracle. Now, if there's a God, does he do miracles? That's the way to verify his revelation, you see, if there's any revelation at all. And we attack that. I mean, we this is a major defense of miracles, an anthology that hasn't been done before, from all I know. I mean, it's coming from a non-believer's perspective anyway. I mean, there's all kinds of anthologies from believing scholars that defend it, tomes. And the other one on horrendous suffering talks about, well, now maybe God isn't good, and maybe there's reason to think that if God exists, he's a horrible bastard.
Yeah.
That's if he exists. So one, there's no evidence he exists, God, he, she. And secondly, there's no evidence. I mean, there's actually tons of evidence that if that God exists, he's a horrible bastard. So these last two books are really key to my whole 12 book repertoire that seals the deal. And then after that, I'm going to just go enjoy life with my wife.
Nice. Well, one of the questions that I tend to ask theists whenever we get into a morality discussion, it's usually with Christians, where the conversation goes to God's divine justice and his divine judgment and his morality and this objective morality idea, which isn't really a thing. But one of the questions I tend to ask is, if God was evil and saying that he's good, how would you be able to tell the difference between how do you tell the difference between an actually good God and an evil God who's all powerful, all knowing, and all present, who says that he's good? What is the test to determine one from the other?
And the answer is they can't tell you.
There is none.
I know this. As philosopher Stephen Law comes up with I think it's called the evil God hypothesis, and it's been said before him. There really wouldn't be anything. You can make excuses. If you can make excuses for the evil in the world, given a good God, God knows best. You're misinterpreting. He allows for free will. If you can make those same excuses to exonerate a good God, given the present evil in this world, then you can do the same thing if there's an evil God. Well, yeah, there's goodness that exists, but you got to allow for free will. Yeah, God knows what's best. I mean, this evil God, he knows what's best. So you're using the same type of excuses to excuse an evil God as you would, to excuse a good God. So given that, there's no way you could tell. You're right. Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, and that's only for the Christians or the theists who are using some sort of measure that we actually use to determine good from evil.
Which is the only measure we have. I mean, our own human standard.
Right. And so they're using that to use that kind of argument. But then I run into Christians who say, well, no, you can't use that because your assessment of good and evil is tainted. You're a sinful, fallen being. Only God, who is perfect, can truly judge good from evil.
So it's really strange. It's really strange that this good God would create within us a certain moral sensibility, like torturing children for the fun of it is bad, and yet make us want to believe in him, even though he says in Psalm, I think it's 137, happy is he who dashes babies on the rocks. I think it's 137, and what that verse means is that the act of genocide is actually being completed, because after you kill all the moms and the pops and all the grandpas and the kids, the young kids, then who's left to kill? The babies. So it's basically saying that these are the very last acts of genocide. Now I'm supposed to all of a sudden upturn my stomach for that in order to believe in a good God? Well, no, you've done yourself service, I would say to God, if he exists. I say you are stepping on your own dick, if you will. It's like you take away what you give on the one hand. It's like, which is it? It's his problem if my moral sensitivities do not allow for the things we read in the Bible. It's his problem, not mine. His problem.
Is Christianity harmful?
For almost any question you ask me, I could produce one of my books that says something to that effect. So I'm sorry if you don't have to
give us the whole answer. This gives us a reason to buy these books. But
I mean, I want you to take a look at this one.
Yep.
I have chapters in here by scholars and atheists alike, atheist scholars and just atheist voices alike, like Robert Ingersoll, Victor Stenger, Peter Bukhosian, David Eller. We have chapters on genocide. We have chapters on the witch hunt. We have chapters on slavery. We have chapters on democracy and the Dark Ages and the sanctity of life and gender binary and LGBT people. And we have on how Christianity can be hazardous to your health when it comes to medical procedures, the environment, even animals and women. Is Christianity harmful? This settles that case. I truly am. I didn't write all these chapters. I wrote 4 of them, so I'm not just saying this. I'm saying this as a reader as well. Yeah. Violence. It's a really good book. I don't care if I could give the books away, I would. I truly, honestly, if I could give my books away, I could. I can't. If I have to buy them and then mail them out, you're going to have to pay for that, So,
which I don't mind doing at all. I just did a show yesterday on my other show, Secular Soapbox, where we discussed hell, the Hell Doctrine, and this idea of teaching children that there's a place that God created to burn people for all eternity, but He loves you. This is an old George Carlin joke. I'm rehashing, but this is what I would consider a form of child abuse. To tell children that, and in Christianity, it's viewed as a good thing, a net positive somehow, despite, the psychological damage that you may be doing to people, whether they remain Christian their whole life or deconvert or whatever. You've really scarred them with one of the worst human man-made ideas. This isn't the mind of an all-knowing, all-good being who loves us. Didn't come up with this idea. So an evil man, possibly one of the worst people who ever existed, several times over, came up with this idea to instill fear into people and control. And fear is a good motivator, but it doesn't elicit any true respect.
Or love. Or love.
Or love. It's not genuine love.
If you're supposed to love God
with all your heart,
all you have are threats. Then,
that's a pretty weak God, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Like if he has to compel you, like it's like holding a gun to your head. You will love me, or I will shoot you.
Well, I think people ought to reread the book of Job. First off, it's a fictitious story because there's a dialogue in there that is in Hebrew rhyme, and the Hebrew rhyme is where they mimic the thought of the first phrase in the second phrase. It's not a rhyming in the sense that it sounds the same, but it's a Hebrew poetry where they mimic the thought of the first verse and the second verse. So it's definitely poetry, and people do not talk in poetry when they're discussing things like the friends of Job as he sat in dust and was covered with boils. So it's a fictitious play. But you ought to read the book of Job, because in the first chapter and in the final chapter, this is modeled based on the Mesopotamian king. He could do whatever he wanted to his subjects. He had spies he sent out into the people to make sure they were loyal. If they weren't loyal, he would chop off their head. I mean, he could do what he wanted so long as he kept from being assassinated himself. That means he had to pay attention to his royals. But this is the God of the Bible, the one that's modeled on the kings of that day. It's pretty plain. That's the God you find throughout the whole Old Testament and New Testament. The God who has subjects who are forced to worship him under threats, and he doles them out a few portions of this and says, asking you shall receive, and I'll give you maybe some. And the book of Job, of all the books in the Bible, supposedly is supposed to answer the problem of evil. All we have is the God of that book yelling at Job for not trusting him, despite the fact that Job had no reason to trust him. So it's not. It's a good book to reread it, think through. It's truly barbaric what that God does and can do and did do.
Yeah, and also the same with Abraham as well. He didn't.
Yeah, there's lots of different stories, but yeah.
He didn't harm Abraham in the same way, but just the test of righteous. It boggled my mind how the Bible describes these as righteous men. And which is how they garnered God's attention in the first place. Abraham was seen as righteous in the eyes of the Lord, so he decided to test him for some reason. And I never understood that. Does God know the answer to the test in advance? And if he does, then what's the point of the test? And
exactly.
If the point of the test is to trust God, why would God tell him to sacrifice his son? Because if a God told me that, I wouldn't trust him. I'd be like, that this can't be the God that cares about people. He wouldn't ask me to do that. So be gone, you evil demon. And then he should have passed the test. But he passed the test by actually trying to go through with the sacrifice, which was evil. So that's a failure. Like, he should have failed the test.
Yeah, I would definitely say no, God. I really don't, unless you give me some evidence that this is going to be a right thing to do. I'm not touching my son.
Yeah, unless it's an evil God, and he really just wants your obedience, and he doesn't care about what
you're pretty happy with that argument. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me. It doesn't make sense. None of this makes any sense.
No, the counter argument makes sense to you. The evil God. Yeah, it does. Sure. But I would say if God can judge our intentions, and then none of this is had to happen. None of this. So he could have saved all kinds of suffering, and those who would reject him, if that's, by the way, that's questionable whether God would care whether we believed on him or not. But if that's somehow a value to him, then And he could judge in advance whether we're going to believe, and it just not ever create the people who end up in hell in the first place. And therefore, there's no occupant in the hotel hell at all. And just by judging the intentions and these persons, foreknowledge, if you want, and these people can, they're going to all love me, and apparently I want to be loved. And since I want to be loved, and I can judge that they're going to love me in the end, I won't even create them. I'll just bring them into heaven. No, none of that makes sense. None of what he did makes sense. You're right.
I will say, though, there is at least one passage in the Bible that I find to be useful. I don't think that the whole thing should be thrown away. There is some useful information in there for me. Ecclesiastes has a passage that says, test all things. Don't scoff at prophecies, but test them. Hold on to the ones that are good. Reject every kind of evil. And so when I apply that wisdom to the Bible itself, I can reject most of what's in there because a lot of it is evil, and just hold on to the little bits and pieces that are actually good, like love thy neighbor.
Which we never needed Ecclesiastes to figure out for ourselves.
No, it's
and if it really were an important part of the Bible, then God could have emphasized it in, say, the Ten Commandments. One of them would say, "Thou shalt test things and subject them to the objective evidence," and repeated himself over and over again, and not upplayed the virtue of faith. But yeah, there's some good things in the Bible, sure.
We have come to the conclusion of our show. I really appreciate you coming on, John. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to you again when some of your future projects come out. We'd love to have you back if you're willing.
Okay, nice, good.
And as always, I like to invite any of the viewers to meet up with us. If you are interested in possibly talking to one of the regular members of Tang, we are having an Atheist Network group meetup called Better. It's October 9th and 10th at the Allen County War Memorial Coliseum in Fort Wayne. And we are going to have a number of guests there that you guys might be fascinated by. We have Seth Andrews, Dr. Josh Bowen, Tom Jump, Anthony Magnabosco, Cynthia McDonald, and Dave Warnock. So reservations are available now at www.tart.live. The link for that will be in the description below. And once again, I'd like to thank John W. Loftus for joining us today. And unfortunately, Mr. Loftus is a busy man. He won't be able to join us in the Discord after this, but this episode, as it's pre-recorded, I would like to invite everyone who made it to this point in the show to join me afterwards in the Discord, where we will talk about some of the thoughts that John expressed today, and the link for that will be provided in the chat. If you've enjoyed the show, please hit the like button, and you can catch me here weekly on Tang, Tuesday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to subscribe to Tang, the Atheist Network group, for more awesome secular content. And for Oz, producer Wes, Sunny Shell, my name is Bryce Aroni. Have a good morning, have a good afternoon, have a good night, and I'll see you next time on The Bryce is Right.